think is about 3.2%, which is arguably it's well below the national average right now, and it's among I think states, probably about half of states that are doing pretty well. So how can you argue, or what would you argue? I mean, is it difficult to argue that there needs to be some kind of change in the White House, that the economy overall is headed in the wrong direction? Sort of how are you thinking about that?
Well, I think if you really look, especially not only Georgia, but if you look in the Southeast at unemployment rates, the business environment, the economic wins that we've gotten, it's because of our business environment. It's not because of the business environment of Washington, D.C. or of the Biden administration. I think a lot of the things that you're seeing in our economy are because of actions that we've taken or other Republican governors like myself have taken in places like Tennessee or South Carolina. And Florida's really a lot different economy than ours, but certainly has done extremely well. And, I think that's why we're doing so well, especially when you compare that to, some of the Democratic-run states in the Northeast and obviously California, where you see people and companies that are leaving. When you look at the companies that are coming here, I know the media writes a lot about, they're getting this, federal tax credit because of this piece of legislation that passed or what have you. But regardless of that, they could go anywhere in the country. But the reason they're coming to states like Georgia is because, we have that business environment, we have the infrastructure, we got a great regulatory environment, speed to the market on the sites, our logistics and infrastructure network. And, that's really where my focus has been as a small business person for over 35 years, or close to 35 years now, both Marty Kemp and I both. I've just tried to make sure we're keeping people working and we're keeping money in their pocket and that they're happy. And, you look at the last 2 years in Georgia, we have given $5 billion back to the taxpayer. So if you're a family, you've gotten basically $500 for a tax refund 2 years ago. You got another one, not this past legislative session, but the one before that, to make up $1,000. You got about $500 of property tax relief that we did, and then we suspended motor fuel and diesel fuel taxes for over 9 months, 2 different times. That was over $1.3 billion of savings to Georgia taxpayers. And so even though you had this 40-year high Biden inflation, if you want to call it that, we in Georgia and the policymakers, the colleagues I was working with and the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate, we were trying to give people some of their money back to help them fight through that. And so that's why I think, one reason our business environment has stayed so good, and then we're working really hard on the workforce development front to continue to produce, more people for the workforce every day. Our unemployment rate is not at a historic low, but it's pretty dang close to it. And the historic low happened, within the last year, I believe it was. We inched up just a little, but even as the federal rate has gone up the last couple of months, ours has stayed steady. So the gap of us being below the national average has continued to increase, and we have continued to add people to the workforce. So this month, or last month when we reported, we broke another record for the most people ever working in the history of our state that are employed. And that was the same case the month before, and the month before that, and the month before that. So even though things are really tight in the labor market, and we have a lot of needs to meet, not only this year, but over the next 3 and 4 years as a lot of projects are built out in our state, we continue to add more people to the workforce because we have people migrating into our state, taking some of those jobs, but then we're also doing things like the Georgia Match program, which is the largest direct college admissions program in the country, that's working to get more high school seniors either into a 4-year university or college setting or to a technical college where they're getting skills and trades learnings to meet the needs of the employers that we got. So as many challenges as we got a lot of opportunities, and we're meeting those needs.
Can I just follow up quickly on that? That by Bloomberg's count, you mentioned the investments in the state. By Bloomberg's count, Georgia leads the nation in clean technology factory investments since the Inflation Reduction Act. So what credit would you give the Biden administration for those investments?
Well, I would give them credit for passing the bill and picking winners and losers. I don't know that it's really, you can make the argument that, yeah, we're getting those, but they could go anywhere in the country. They're still going to get the benefit, right? So why are they coming to Georgia? It's not because of anything that Joe Biden or John Ossoff did. It's because of everything that we're doing on our workforce development issues. It's because, we had the best sites in the country. You look at the Hyundai site, that was the best site in the country. I ran on strengthening rural Georgia. When I first got in office, first part of 19, we put a plan together to have a rural economic development strike team. And part of that plan was also to create 3 new mega sites in rural parts of our state or in areas that would affect rural parts of our state. So we worked with the locals to purchase that site. We got it, shovel ready. We did the same thing on the Rivian site and the same thing on a site that we still have in middle Georgia. And that's the reason they came. And I would just remind you that Hyundai and Rivian both announced before IRA ever passed. The SK battery plant in Commerce, Georgia, announced right after I got elected. Governor Deal actually did that. I did the expansion for that project. I think it was in 2019. I'm almost positive it was before COVID hit. And Treasury Secretary Ross came down for that announcement. So Joe Biden wasn't even in office, and the battery plant had already expanded. So the idea that these things, and this has been my point with IRA all along, and I sent a letter to our 2 senators, and I told Joe Manchin this at Davos 2 years ago when I said to him, Sinema and Coons, y'all are picking winners and losers. So just don't do it at all, or if you are going to do it, just level the playing field for everybody. And that's not what it did. They're trying to help the union-backed automobile makers. They're trying to push, union employment on other manufacturers that are going versus just letting the market work. And that's what we were doing in Georgia. I want Georgia to be the e-mobility capital of the United States of America because I knew this market was coming. I've been reading about it. I've been talking to people about it. I felt like we fit the bill for that. I'd been reading about companies like Rivian and others and just felt like that's where the market was going to go. And we already had a lot of that market in the state anyway. We went and visited one of the electric golf cart manufacturing facilities that's been in Georgia for a long time. And they're continuing to do well. And they were there, a decade ago.
We have a journalist here from the New York Times. Would you like to jump in?
Hi, Governor.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, good to see you again.
Looking ahead to November, over the last few days, we've heard from a number of Republicans who have called for unity in the party, particularly after the assassination attempt on former President Trump. Do you see that level of unity coming together in Georgia? And have you spoken to the former president about what needs to be done to make sure that Republicans are successful in November?
Yeah, I haven't talked to the former president, but I would say that I really felt like Georgia Republicans have been unifying even before Saturday in a lot of ways, and certainly since then. I think it's a great opportunity for the whole country to have a little unification, even if it's not politically, which obviously is not going to happen. But I do think it really sends the message to everybody that we need to really reassess what's important in our lives. Let's fight for our position. Let's fight this fight out at the ballot box. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And I think you saw a lot of that on Saturday. I hope that continues. But also know that, look, between now and November, it's a long way. It's going to be a hard fight, and both sides are going to fight hard, and I think you'll see that. But it doesn't mean that we can't do that in respectful ways. But I really feel like, especially post-debate, the Republicans were unifying for sure.
I wanted to talk to you about electoral integrity, Governor Kemp. 2016, DHS asked you to insulate Georgia's elections from Russian interference. You pushed back on them. In 2020, then President Donald Trump asked you to flip votes in Georgia in his favor, and you resisted that. So I wanted to ask you sort of a twofold question here. One, do you worry about foreign interference in U.S. elections this year.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about having Donald Trump as the steward of your party in the wake of what you experienced in 2020?
Well, I would just say if you go back and look at the whole 2016 cycle and, talking about Homeland Security, but also the Civil Rights Division of the Obama Justice Department, I mean, they were actively working, with a lot of our adversaries and other voter groups and other things to really undermine things that we have done to have secure elections in the state of Georgia, literally, coordinating with them, these liberal groups on lawsuits and a lot of other things. And so, that's really what I was pushing back on and making sure as Secretary of State that, when you're Secretary of State and you're in charge of administering elections, especially in a state like Georgia, the buck stops with you. And the things I was doing back then, we had a lot of issues from a cybersecurity going on with our systems, and quite honestly, we weren't getting a lot of answers out of the Obama administration, and we did out of the Trump administration because it was just a much better working relationship. In 2020, I simply followed the law and the Constitution. I was not Secretary of State then. I had a completely different role than I did in 2016. So I feel like we have a secure, accessible, fair system in our state. A lot of that's because of our Voter Integrity Act that we passed when many politicians, including Joe Biden and others, said it was Jim Crow 2.0 and a lot of other things, and we ended up having record turnout in early voting in our state and a lot of other things that went on. And we've had good elections since then. So I'm very confident that we're going to do that. And, other things on the integrity of the system and other things, you really need to probably talk to Secretary Raffensperger about that.
I think we have Bill Barrow here from the AP. Bill, would you like to jump in?
Bill?
How are you?
Good.
Sort of building on Maya's question, there have been a lot of calls from President Biden and plenty of people on your side of the aisle, and you just said it yourself, that we have to tone the rhetoric down. How much, but we've also heard a lot of people, including the now vice presidential nominee, point the finger at the left for what happened on Saturday. How much responsibility should President Trump take himself, former President Trump take himself for the atmosphere and the tensions in our politics?
Well, I would just say this from my perspective. I mean, look, I've been in the middle of the circular firing squad at times in my career where people on both sides were taking these same type shots at me. But also have the, really the mindset of, it kind of comes with the territory, and you got to be able to step up and defend your position and let people know why you did something, and not cower down to really a political position and really stand up for what guides you in principle. That's what I've tried to do, and I think it's a real opportunity for political leaders in the country, not just former President Trump or his vice presidential pick, but really for all politicians to stand up and do that. Now, do I think everybody's going to do that? I absolutely do not think that. But I do think you'll see a lot of people that have done that and will continue to do that. And quite honestly, there's been a lot of Republican governors that have done that.
All right, John from CNN, would you like to jump in as well?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this. I have two questions. First, just obviously, former President Trump announced that J.D. Vance is his pick for vice president, his vice presidential nominee. Could you just share a little bit about what do you think that he brings to the ticket? And then the second question on a sort of different tact is, your neighbor in North Carolina, there's a Democratic governor there who's won 2 re-elections. The Republican nominee, Mark Robinson, is a very sort of different brand of Republican from you. I mean, why do you think that Republicans in North Carolina have gone in that direction? And do you think that they can win, your party can win that governor's race there?
Yeah, well, J.D. Vance, Senator Vance, is one of the few vice presidential, supposedly the field that was out there that I haven't crossed paths with him that much. So I don't know that much about him. But look, I think if that's who President former President Trump thinks can help him on the ticket, if he feels like he can be a president if someone were to, something were to happen to him, then I think he's a good pick. I mean, he's a United States Senator. He's been through a tough campaign. He no doubt is a great messenger, and I think he helps President Trump in a lot of ways there. He's also young, which I think brings a little different dynamic to this race. And so I think it'd be fine. I think the party will rally, behind the pick. As for North Carolina, look, it's a great opportunity. We have great opportunity as Republican governors. I'm the vice chair of the Republican Governors Association. We got a great chance to hold the New Hampshire seat, and we also have a great chance to win an open seat in North Carolina. That is a Republican-leaning state. It's a state like I talked about earlier. You got to have a good candidate. You got to have a good ground game, and do all the things that you need to do to be able to win. And Mark Robinson, I mean, certainly dynamic speaker. I think he's working very hard. He's raising good money. He's not going to outraise his opponent in that race. And nobody ever thought he would, but I think he's raising a lot more than most people thought he would. And I think it's a great opportunity for Republicans to pick that state up. And I think especially if President Trump continues to run strong there, it's a great opportunity.
Ted Mann, you write a lot about the intersection of business and Washington. Do you want to jump in?
I do. I actually have a follow-up question on Caroline's question about what you just mentioned, the ability to win Georgia. You mentioned mechanical things. Are there things that you see Trump's campaign doing this time around that they were not doing 4 years ago? Things that they're getting right, perhaps, that didn't go right, that would sort of change the outcome?
Well, I still have some concerns about what's going on with the ground game, with quite honestly the national party and the state party. I know everybody's talking about doing those things, and obviously the Trump campaign is too. I know they're opening offices and working to get a robust volunteer effort out there. But I just know with what I saw in 2020, Stacey Abrams and the Democrats had a hell of a ground game, and we did not. And that's a big reason I think that Trump lost Georgia and David Perdue lost his Senate seat. And when I saw that, I just said to myself, I'm not going to allow that to happen to me and to our campaign. And so we just said we're going to do this ourselves. We created a leadership committee. We raised $50 million more dollars than we raised in 2018. Still got outspent by Stacey Abrams, but we had enough money to do that ground game, to go after those persuadable voters and to knock on their door and call them up and poll them and do focus groups and daily tracking, modeling, trying to figure out what are the issues that can move them our way, and obviously was very successful. And that's we announced the other day that my leadership committee, we're going to spend at least $1.5 million on our ground game in Georgia to help turn people out, which will really going to be focused on helping hold our legislative majorities in districts where we have an opportunity to lose somebody, but also seats where we have an opportunity to gain somebody. But that also, in turn, will be doing other things to turn the vote out for the entire ticket up and down the ballot. And I just, and there's a lot of other groups and people that are raising money to do those things, but I just don't have, I don't have eyeballs into those operations. And so I don't know, I don't want to be critical of the, President Trump's campaign or any of the other groups, because I just don't know exactly what they're doing. But I know what we're doing, and I know what we did, and I know what it takes to work. And we cannot take those things for granted. And I will say that Chairman Whiteley, who was former state party chair in North Carolina, he knows how to do those things.
And just to add to Ted's question, and the issue that's going to get people to turn out that didn't before is the pocketbook issue that you're talking, or what is it going to actually get them?
Well, I think people are going to be very motivated to turn out. I think certainly with what happened Saturday on the Republican side, I think it's going to energize people to turn out. That was just a pivotal type moment. The thing is the people that are going to turn out and make sure that the suburban voters or maybe people that weren't with President Trump in 2020 is making sure that they're going to be with him in this election. That's what's going to be the key. Of course, I think the Biden campaign has a problem of making sure they get all their people that would vote for them to actually care enough to go vote. I think they're going to have or at least right now, in my opinion, I think they're really facing a lot of people that may just sit this one out, which can be very hurtful to him in Georgia. So, again, that goes back to my reason of this is a great opportunity this week and over the next 4 or 5 months is to give people a reason to vote for you.
Patrick, I think we have you from the Washington Post.
Thanks. Thanks for doing this, Governor. Patrick Martin from the Washington Post. I wanted to go back to these questions about unity and peace. There have been a lot of threats since 2020 against election officials in Georgia and other states. With President Trump calling for peace and unity, do you think those will be reduced in a meaningful way this election cycle? And I also wanted to ask you to follow up on the comments you made about the North Carolina candidate, Mark Robinson.
Let me answer the elections piece first. So, I don't know if I could really speak to that. I would hope that would be the case. I was Secretary of State for almost 9 years. I worked with a lot of these local elections folks, a lot of these people, that are on local election boards or voluntary type community positions. I tell a lot of my Republican friends that get really mad about some issue at the county level, I'm like, have you talked to your Republican member of your local elections board? And they're like, what? We have a Republican member of the local elections board, and people that complain to me about voting issues, I'm like, are you signed up to be a poll worker or a poll watcher and be part of the process? Don't just complain about these things. Actually show up and watch, because I've been there. I've seen what goes into making sure the voting system is secure and locked down before Election Day. I've seen what happens on Election Day. I've seen the count afterwards and how all those things play out. I've sent investigators to monitor and make sure that counties that habitually have hard times or spot check throughout the day. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do. Most of the local elections people that I work with were good, genuine people. Do mischievous things happen in elections? They do. Do mechanical issues happen in elections? They absolutely do. Humans are involved in it, so you're going to have issues. I think there needs to be an understanding from people out there that's why there's a process for all of this. And if you don't like the process, you need to talk to your legislators and you can change that, which a lot of what we saw during the pandemic were rules that were put in place by a non-legislative body because of public health emergencies. And the General Assembly and myself felt like we needed to really tighten some of those things up. And we did that. We also made the election more accessible, adding days to vote on Sunday in our state. And I think we're in a really good place. It would be my hope that people would not be threatening local elections officials. I can tell you as governor, if people are doing that or if people are physically assaulting or talking about doing that, we'll take strong law enforcement actions against those individuals. And I know we've had and we'll continue to talk to local, state, and federal partners on making sure that that part of the voting system and election day and early voting apparatus is comfortable for people on all sides and for the election workers.
And then you've been talking favorably about more peaceful rhetoric, but you also just called Mark Robinson a dynamic speaker. He did say recently that some folks need killing. Is he engaging in responsible rhetoric?
Well, I think it depends on what I haven't seen that quote.
You've seen others from him. He's made some quite controversial comments.
Well, look, there's a lot of people that have made very controversial comments, including a lot of Democrats. I think it's an opportunity for everybody to really reassess where they are and what they're saying.
Would you like him to tone down his rhetoric after Saturday?
Well, I haven't seen anything he said since Saturday. So, I need a little more to comment on than that.
Governor, I wanted to bring in our anchor of Bloomberg's Balance of Power for Bloomberg, Kaylee Lyons.
If we could go back to what we were discussing with election security, be it threats against poll workers or otherwise, if we think back to the debate, one of the only questions that was asked of former President Trump multiple times was whether he committed to accepting the results of the election. especially knowing how he reacted to the very tight vote count in Georgia in 2020, knowing that he did not give a firm yes to that. He just said he would if they are free and fair. Does he have any reason to believe that whatever the result is in Georgia, that it wouldn't have been free and fair?
Well, I kind of laughed at that question because somebody sent me a clip of, if y'all remember, our former Congressman Cynthia McKinney from the great state of Georgia. She contested a Democratic primary and complained about the election being stolen. We all know what happened in 2018 with my opponent and other people really on both sides of the aisle that have had these kind of issues. I really think in some ways the media is kind of asking that question in a way that's quite honestly hard to answer, because I know for me, like, I'm going to accept the results of the election once the process has been completely played out. But that doesn't mean, if somebody calls the race, the night of the election, I mean, there's a lot of things that still have to happen before it is, legally certified. And there's ways that the campaigns can contest those kind of things. And so, I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the public knows what the processes are, and to make sure that the candidates and campaigns, they should know this. I mean, they should have good lawyers and people watching where they can deal with any issues that are on the ground. We did that in our campaigns. We did that for almost 3 weeks when Stacey Abrams wouldn't concede after the 2018 race. And nobody's asking about that. They're all asking about what happened in 2020. So candidates have a right, any candidate that's on that ballot, to take different measures through the law if they have questions about the election. And I hope we can have good processes and good understanding of that on Election Day. And I think as long as we have a secure, accessible, and fair election, candidates will accept that. I know in Georgia, I feel like we're going to get that.
Gregory, you've been doing a lot of our research around swing states. Do you want to jump in?
I actually had a different kind of a question that I've been pondering and would sort of like your thoughts on. I want to talk about after 2024 and the future of the Republican Party, but both parties actually. We went through a generation in American politics where we had a lot of governors go to the White House, including Jimmy Carter from your state, Ronald Reagan, Clinton, Bush. More recently, we're in a phase where the Senate is the path to the White House. If we're a football game, the senators would be running up the score, right? I mean, it's in terms of just what we saw today, right? I mean, J.D. Vance, senator, on the ticket. Would the Republican Party, or for that matter, both parties, be better served by going to their governor's wings in 2028? Would you think the Republican Party should put forward a governor in 2028? And would you be one of those governors that?
Well, I'm staying focused on 2024. We can worry about 28 after first Tuesday in November.
But do you think about that? Do you think about?
Oh yeah. Listen, I think especially on the Republican side, you have a lot of great policymakers, a lot of great dynamic candidates. They know how to govern, and so look, I'm a big fan of Republican governors running for the White House, and you saw some of that this year. I mean, even though you don't have one as our nominee or one that's going to be the vice presidential nominee, you still had a lot of them that were featured in the primary campaign. You had a lot of other people that were talked about that didn't run, and so I think they made an impact there.
Governor, I wanted to jump in to harken back to when you were talking about the economy and you were talking about the tight labor market. There's been some economic research that's starting to come out more and more now about how important immigration has actually been in our aging society to keeping that economy and jobs market strong. But so much of the Republican rhetoric when it comes to immigration, migration has been quite negative. What do you think the Republican Party's message should be when it comes to migrants and immigration?
Well, I've seen a lot of the economic figures. I mean, there's no doubt that, the illegal people that are here working in our country are helping with GDP growth. The same people that are quoting GDP growth, they're also not saying, but what are people here that are not working or that their kids are, in school or their family members going to an emergency room visit with no insurance. Like, what is that costing us? I mean, nobody's really talking about the negative benefits of all. I guess people are talking about it, but nobody's putting a number out there like they are when they're talking about with the economy. So I think there's definitely ebbs and flows there. I mean, listen, I think there's a lot of Republicans in today's world that really want to see a good, legal immigration system in our country. There's no doubt that we have workforce needs that could be met through that, while also protecting the American worker. And I think in this environment, that's something that, I would hope that, a future President Trump would be able to work across the aisle. I mean, I really felt like he would have had the opportunity to do that when he was in office before. Quite honestly, President Obama had the opportunity to do that, and Joe Biden did, and they didn't do a damn thing. So, that would be one of the things where, in light of what happened Saturday and the whole unity movement, once we can get past this presidential election, I mean, hopefully the policymakers in D.C. will actually try to do something working across the political aisles to address, things like fixing the broken system that we have on immigration, making sure that we're meeting the future needs that we have with the security of our country and national defense and other things that I pay attention to and a lot of Americans are worried about. So I think there'd be a big opportunity there.
How important is this issue to voters in Georgia, and what do you hear from your constituents there?
Yeah, well, the issue is huge. I mean, it's probably the number 2 issue after, inflation and having a good paying job. Probably not hot as an issue as it was, obviously, back when we had the tragic death of Lake and Riley, and even before that when you had just the viral pictures of people flooding across the border in Eagle Pass, Texas, and other places. But it's still very top of mind. And I think, to me, it's an easy win if President Trump can get back in office, just to implement a lot of the previous policies he had, working with Republican governors and lawmakers in D.C. to simply just secure the border. I mean, to me, I think if you could just secure the border, make the American people on both sides of the aisle feel comfortable that we, have got a legal process and our border's secure, then you can start moving on to having, other conversations about, how you're going to fix the broken system that we got, whether it's, H-2A programs and fitting the needs where you have the right amount of people that are coming in to work, but not too many where it's hurting the American worker and things of that nature.
Governor, I wanted to bring in our colleague Mary Ellen from Bloomberg Opinion, one of our columnists. Mary Ellen, I think you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Governor. Your state is one of the states in the Southeast or in the South that has adopted some very restrictive abortion laws. This is the first year in about over 40 years that the Republican platform has not included a national abortion ban. If that is the kind of policy that is good for everyone who lives in Georgia, whether they support abortion or not, why shouldn't that same policy be adopted as a national policy? Why, if it's good enough for Georgia, why not for the nation?
So I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
There's no national abortion ban in the Republican platform for the first time. And you have enacted a heartbeat bill in Georgia that is extraordinarily strict. If it's so good to have a heartbeat bill in Georgia, why not put it on the Republican platform to make that be a national standard?
Well, I mean, the Supreme Court obviously ruled that this was a state's issue. Our state has dealt with this back in 2019. We have a legislative session every year where any legislator can bring forth, any new ideas when it comes to abortion in our state. I don't know how the party got to the platform this year. I wasn't part of that. Obviously, President Trump's the nominee, so I'm sure it's, his priorities. A lot of people are upset about that. A lot of people are glad about that. But at the end of the day, the fight is a state-by-state fight. We are a state in Georgia that I believe values life. I believe, and our policy says that, that starts now through the law at a detectable heartbeat. We've got 3 exceptions. And I tell people all the time, look, even if you don't agree with that issue, we're also a state that has valued life in many other ways. We've done adoption reform, we've done foster care reform. First Lady Marty Kemp has done more than anybody in the country at the state level, working with her Grace Commission and the members of the General Assembly and our administration to pass 9 pieces of human trafficking legislation that goes after the perpetrators, raises the awareness, also helps and also helps the victims of that evil crime so that we can end that. And so there's more issues on life that we agree with in Georgia and around the country, I think, than we disagree with. And so I wouldn't be able to speak to the national platform, but I mean that's where we are in Georgia.
Governor, we have many bureau chiefs across the U.S. and globe, and we actually have one of them with us today, Julie Fine, our Texas bureau chief.
Fellow Southerner, how are you?
Hello.
Jump in, Julie.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit about when you talked about Lake and Riley, and obviously any death is it's devastating, and so many people were so upset by her death, but yet in America, as you know, there's violence and there's deaths every single day. So in general, how do you think that the crime in the United States for all victims should be handled? Especially because the crime, when it does happen, also affects the economy.
Well, I mean, I ran on going after street gangs in 2017 and 18 and literally had a lot of the media back home in Georgia, especially in Atlanta, they were giving me a hard time about that, saying I was just trying to scare people, this wasn't an issue. And I knew it was, because I was talking to sheriffs, I was talking to local prosecutors. I've been, literally for 9 years as Secretary of State, canvassing the state, working with every county, going in the courthouses, talking with the sheriffs and the prosecutors. And I knew we had a big issue. And so when I got in office, running for office, I put together a plan to create a gang task force at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. My first budget did that. We passed legislation to get tougher on penalties and other things. And we really started going after street gangs in our state. Since then, the General Assembly has also passed legislation and funded additional money in the Attorney General's office so that they have a gang prosecution unit so that we can actually prosecute gangs when local prosecutors won't do their job and do that. And I think that's a big reason I got reelected, because the people out there were scared to death in their local communities. And you look at civil unrest on the on the backside of George Floyd. We saw, especially in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery, we saw injustice with our own eyes. There's a reason that people should have been upset. But there was also a lot of people during that time that were taking advantage of just lawlessness in cities around the country and wreaking havoc on our people. And we just didn't allow that to happen in Georgia. It's a lot better now than it was then, because we have a new mayor and a police chief in Atlanta that we're working well with to go after these lawbreakers and these street gangs, and we've had a coordinated push in our state. And that is the number one responsibility that I have as governor. It's embedded in our state constitution, and that is to keep the public safe. And I think that's it's a big issue on the campaign trail. I think it will be in the presidential race too.
So, Governor, we've been talking about national priorities and issues, state by state governance. One thing we haven't talked about yet is foreign policy, and increasingly that's coming into issues of national security and others. We have our leader of our foreign policy coverage here at the table, Nick Wadhams. Nick, do you want to jump in on a question?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about foreign investment in the state and the degree to which you'll be seeking it out more? There's this cross current between a desire for more investment versus a greater hostility and suspicion of countries like China. Where do you stand on the idea of more investment, but also the prospect of Chinese investment? Is that just a dead letter for you?
Yeah, well, we're not incentivizing Chinese investment in the state. Obviously, there's Chinese investment, in a lot of places around the country. We passed some legislation this year helping protect some of our more sensitive rural properties that are out there. But, direct foreign investment has been a stalwart of our state. We've got 120 Korean companies doing business in Georgia right now. Marty and I just got back from a delegation trip to Korea that was just incredible. A lot of great investments. They're hiring a lot of hardworking Georgians and are embedded in our communities. And it's been that way in Georgia for over 20 years now. When SK first came to, we had in 2006 the big Kia announcement, and it's been really been going gangbusters ever since then. So we're very optimistic about the future. It's not just them. We've got a lot of Japanese companies, German, other European companies that are in our state. We're also exporting a lot of goods to them and importing a lot of their goods. So this is a really good trade that's benefiting both countries, and these countries are good allies of the United States. And so, that's really what we're looking for in Georgia.
Do you find, though, it wasn't too long ago that states across the nation were really pushing very hard for Chinese investment, and
yeah, a lot.
We saw a flip almost, a binary 1 to 0 where that got shut down. Do you have any concern that you would push for this foreign investment and then something may occur, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever else comes along, that's going to then essentially cut the chair out from under you?
With other countries other than China?
Correct.
Yeah, you never know kind of where people are going on their trade policy, but I think it's very tough to do that when we're trying to have that both ways. And that's really what we're focused on in Georgia, is not just having the trade and investment that's just good for our state. It also needs to be good for their country. And I think when that's the case, I think that's really what the D.C. policymakers are looking for, versus what we're seeing in China now, where they're dumping goods in our country, and we're not getting a lot of benefit out of that. And in fact, we're getting hurt by that in a lot of ways.
Governor, you talked earlier about the importance of turnout. There seems to be a lot of momentum right now heading in the Republican Party's way, but that, at least in Georgia, you're not going to be complacent, especially when it comes to the ground game and knocking on doors. One of the things that we've reported on is how important the black vote, particularly in states like Georgia, could be for Biden retaining the White House. What's your perspective on where black voters are in your state right now?
Well, I think there's definitely an opportunity out there, especially for African American men. And look, we went after a lot of that persuadable vote with African Americans in the state. The last 2 weeks of the campaign, it was kind of really interesting that Stacey Abrams had run out of money, and we were, up on black radio in downtown Atlanta with our message of, economic prosperity, getting business back going, during COVID, even when I was getting criticized a lot, making sure people's kids were getting back in the classroom and making sure that we were keeping people's neighborhood and their communities and businesses safe. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. And I think a lot of what, former President Trump's message is resonating with people as well. And I think on the flip side of that, I don't think President Biden's done a good job of, selling to people, what he's actually done. And I certainly don't want to give him any advice, but that's why I keep saying, I think a lot of these people are in the same boat that I am. I think they feel like they can't afford another 4 years of Joe Biden.
I think we have time for just one last quick question. George, would you like to jump in? This is our colleague George from BGov.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Governor. Georgia has a big Senate race in 26. Are you interested?
I heard about that.
Are you interested in challenging yourself?
I'm focused on 24. You may have missed that earlier.
Right. Well, in regards to 28, are you ruling out 26?
Well, I'm always keeping all doors open. But I have been telling people for a long time, we have got to stay. We do not need to get distracted. That's what Marty and I used to tell people during the campaign every day. We're like, don't get distracted. We got to win today. Tomorrow morning, we got to get up, win tomorrow morning, and we got to do that all the way to the first Tuesday in November, and then we can start worrying about 26 or 28. But I can tell you, there's going to be a lot of people that are excited about winning one of our Senate seats back in 26, and that's why it's important that we win up and down the ticket in 24, because it really takes away the narrative of the Democrats that, we're a purple state and, just a lot of the other narratives that have been out there. And, we've done a good job of pushing back on that by winning in 2022. We did a good job of pushing back, pushing back on that in our Supreme Court race where John Barrow got in a nonpartisan race and made it partisan. We had a big victory there, and I think we're going to do the same thing this November, and that's going to make it really a tough sell to the Democrats that Georgia's a so-called purple or a blue state.
Governor Kemp, as our Washington bureau chief, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time, for the First Lady's time, for joining all of us on this very important week in Milwaukee at the RNC convention. Thank you so much.
Well, thank y'all for having me. Enjoyed it.
I'm going to bring you the TV right now.
All right, you're right.